Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and I am so glad you're here because if you weren't here, you'd be somewhere else. Today's episode is the third installment in our ongoing investigation into the death of Crystal McCrory Jones. If you haven't already watched the first two episodes covering this case, I highly recommend going back and checking those out. They lay some of the groundwork for what we're going to explore today. I'll have the playlist linked in the description box below for easy access. As a brief recap, Crystal McCrory Jones was found deceased in her home on February 9, 2023. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Within hours, her death was ruled a suicide by the West Carrol Parish Sheriff's Department in Oak Grove, Louisiana. The ruling came swiftly and some might say suspiciously so. Since then, multiple discrepancies, inconsistencies, and flat-out errors have come to light, details that paint a much more complicated picture than the official narrative suggests. Despite this, the sheriff's office has refused to revisit the case or conduct anything that could reasonably be called a thorough investigation. In fact, their reluctance to dig deeper has only raised more questions. In today's video, we're going to narrow our focus and look at the actions and whereabouts of Crystal's husband, Tony, both in the days leading up to her death and those after. His movements, his statements, and the timeline he's provided have all come under scrutiny, and for good reason. As I mentioned in the previous video about Crystal's case, her sister Jana was able to recover Crystal's laptop after her death. This laptop would end up spilling tea that I don't think her husband Tony wanted spilled. It left digital breadcrumbs that painted a much clearer and much more troubling picture of what was going on behind closed doors. One of the first things Jana noticed was that someone had been tracking Tony using Google Timeline, which collects and stores location data from a user's phone. This feature isn't always something people even know is enabled, so the question is, who was tracking Tony? Jana also had access to Tony's internet history, and it didn't exactly scream grieving husband. Jana was able to see which kind of websites Tony had been visiting and which ones he had active profiles on, and guess what kind of sites those were? That's right, dating sites. And he didn't just join them in a fit of loneliness after Crystal's death. He had been actively using them for 2 years before she died. You know, I hope Tony is busy right now this very minute writing a book on marital devotion, because he sure seems like an expert. On January 28, 2023, just 2 weeks before Crystal's death, Tony made a Facebook post that read, quote, "FYI, my phone went blank. So if you need me, call, redacted number. I have that phone for about 2 weeks, thanks," end quote. Now, maybe this is just a big fat nothing. Phones die, people get new ones, tech stuff happens. But the timing is strange. The day before that post, Crystal's account was logged out on her laptop. Fast forward to February 7th, 2 days before Crystal was found dead. Tony's Google account was signed into Crystal's computer, and he had received an email notifying him that he had been signed up for Google Timeline. The next day, Tony paid $165 to a local phone repair shop. The exact service isn't clear, but on the same day, he deleted several contacts from his phone. Among the deleted names, a pastor, a coroner, and someone who worked at the bakery barn where Tony claimed he'd eaten lunch the day Crystal died. He also deleted multiple contacts that were formatted oddly: a first name, a dash, and then one or two more names. The naming style makes me wonder if they were parents and students from the martial arts studio he and Crystal had run. If they were current students, that's concerning, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. But there's more about phones. The day Crystal died, Tony had a phone delivered to his home via FedEx. The FedEx driver, by the way, was Crystal's cousin. The package was delivered at 1:16 p.m., and Tony activated the phone later that evening at 8:35 p.m. The phone he'd been using before then was a Galaxy S8 Plus, and that's the phone he was using the day before Crystal's death when he went through and deleted contacts. Then, on February 14th, 5 days after Crystal's death, he deleted another contact, but from a different phone, this one a Samsung 20. So how many phones did Tony have? 1, 2, 3, more? It's hard to say for sure, but the whole thing feels like a telephone shell game. As I was sifting through this information, I started wondering if it was possible if Tony was the one who activated Google Timeline tracking on his own device, maybe to create a digital alibi. The email alert about Timeline had been moved to the trash folder but not fully deleted. If Crystal was the one tracking his phone and had intercepted that email and was trying to hide it, wouldn't she have deleted it entirely so he couldn't find it? This little detail has stuck with me, and it makes me wonder, was Tony creating a trail that he wanted someone to find? Or was he setting something up so he wouldn't be at the center of suspicion? And who's to say that Tony even had his phone the entire day? What if someone else had it? It could just be a string of coincidences, but when the coincidences start piling up, they stop looking like happenstance and start looking like strategy. I already covered Tony's movements on the day that Crystal died, but I didn't get into how he treated Jana, Crystal's sister, when she arrived at the house after getting the phone call about Crystal's death. When she got there, Tony hugged her and, without any build-up or empathy, just said, "It was a single gunshot wound to the head." Who says that? Who delivers that kind of information like it's a headline? Not "I'm sorry" or "I can't believe this happened," just a blunt, clinical statement. When Jana later asked Sheriff Scott Matthews how Tony even knew the cause of death so quickly, Matthews claimed that he had told Tony. Sure, Scotty. Tony also asked Jana that day if she wanted the funeral services held in Bastrop or Oak Grove. So less than an hour after finding out his wife had died, he's already picking out venues. That is not mourning, that's logistics. And speaking of logistics, the very next day, when you'd think someone who'd just lost their spouse would be busy doing something like, I don't know, maybe mourning, Tony was busy with life. Well, life insurance to be exact. He called Crystal's employer, State Farm, to ask about her life insurance policy. Her boss told him Crystal hadn't been working there long enough to qualify. Now, Crystal had worked there before, but had quit to help out with the martial arts studio. But here's another one of those kooky coincidences. It turns out that Tony had been the one who called before Crystal's death to ask if she could return to State Farm. Why? Did he think that if she was rehired, she'd instantly be covered under a new life insurance policy? A few days later, he showed up at the State Farm office, claiming he was there to return Crystal's work shirts. Yes, shirts. Because that's the kind of urgent errand grieving widowers prioritize, and I'm sure State Farm was just worried sick about those shirts. While he was there, surprise, surprise, he asked again about the life insurance. Once again, he was told there was none. On February 13th, Tony posted on Facebook that the martial arts studio would be permanently closed because of Crystal's death. And this is why I wondered if some of the contacts that Tony deleted were current students, because that would be a little suspicious if he had deleted them 5 days before he knew he was closing the studio. And let's not forget Tony's little Google search that same day. And what was his burning question? How soon to date after spouse dies? Well, I'm not sure there's a magic number on how many days after a spouse's death that it's kosher to begin dating again, Tony. But I'm pretty sure it's not 4 days, you squalid lump of flesh. On Valentine's Day, the day of love, Tony posted, quote, "Well, made it through the first night back at home. Wasn't as bad as I thought. Hashtag long road ahead," end quote. Sir, what in the ever-loving heckety heck would impel you to post something like that? Later that evening, a co-worker of Crystal's stopped by Tony's to bring groceries and food that had been collected by the community. It was a kind gesture from a kind person. She stayed for about an hour visiting, and I guess old Tone Loc decided that was her way of saying she wanted to have sex with him. Because according to her, after she left, Tony started sending her sexually explicit messages. In the messages, he was describing, well, how can I put this delicately? He was telling her about the current consistency of one of his appendages. I really wish men would get the memo that the majority of women aren't nearly as infatuated with their doofloppies as they are. February 16th. This is the day that Tony claimed he found the shell casing on Crystal's makeup tray, just lying there, totally unnoticed by deputies, investigators, and anyone else with working eyes. Sheriff Matthews said it was about 5 to 6 feet from Crystal's body, but also insists that it's clearly visible in crime scene photos. It isn't, not even a little bit. Meanwhile, Deputy Irby wrote in his report that the gun didn't chamber the next round because of a limp wrist issue. So if the gun didn't function properly, how exactly did the casing fly 6 feet? I'm not a gun expert, but it makes no sense to me. That same day, Tony went to the funeral home to view Crystal's body, but he didn't go alone. He'd taken a woman with him who wasn't family, and she's married. Even the funeral director had to pull Tony aside and tell him that bringing her was not a good look. On February 18th, Crystal's funeral was held. After the service, Tony handed off everything related to her funeral to Jana. The DVD, the guest book, thank you cards. He didn't want any of it. It's like he was ready to erase Crystal completely, like she'd been a temporary inconvenience instead of the woman he'd promised to love for life. 2 days later, on February 20th, against her family's wishes, Tony had Crystal cremated. This was 2 days before the autopsy was complete. Crystal's family even reached out to attorneys to try to stop the cremation, but because Tony was legally her next of kin, there was nothing they could do. But why have a cremation? The community had already donated money to Tony for funeral expenses. So had Tony spent that money on something else? Jana had set up a GoFundMe account that Tony agreed to, and it was supposed to cover funeral expenses and a headstone. After learning that the GoFundMe money would go toward actual funeral expenses and not whatever else Tony had in mind, he refused to release any of Crystal's ashes to her family except for her 2 sons. He refused Crystal's own mother any of her daughter's ashes. That wasn't the only way he was a horrible person, though. He actually had people reporting to GoFundMe that Jana was misappropriating the funds. Well, GoFundMe investigated and cleared Jana of any wrongdoing. None of Tony's behavior before or after Crystal's death screams grieving husband to me. If anything, it screams man who was ready to move on. A man who seemed more concerned with his phones, his dating profiles, and his next sexual conquest than with the woman he was married to. From what I've learned, Crystal was intelligent, funny, spirited, and kind. She was the kind of woman people feel lucky to know. I don't think Tony deserved her. The more we learn about Crystal's case, the more questions we're left with. That's where I'll leave things for now. As always, thank you for being here and for taking the time to care about Crystal's story. Her life mattered, and the questions surrounding her death deserve real answers. If today's episode raised questions for you, or if you have information, insights, or theories you'd like to share, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. If you have a case you'd like for me to cover, you can reach out through the website at agathamay.com or connect with me on social media. All the links are in the description below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. We're building a community here of people who believe in truth, accountability, and justice, and I'm so grateful to have you with me. Until next time, stay safe and be happy.